The highest paid person on a film is almost never the producer. In fact, producers usually make less than the stars. So how do producers end up out-earning everybody in the film industry? It's not because of the bigger salaries, it's because they're building something most people on set aren't. In this video, I'm gonna break down how that actually works and why understanding it can completely change how you position yourself in this industry. But before we jump in, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss future breakdowns like this. Okay, let's start with the fact. On most films, the producer is not the highest paid. The stars are. Actors can make a strong six figures for a few weeks of work. Directors can command meaningful upfront fees. Crew members are paid during production. Producer often makes less than the talent. And unless a film is lightning in a bottle and becomes a major box office success, the actors are going to out-earn the producer 9 times out of 10 in the short term. It's just how budgets are structured, because the talent is often what gets the film greenlit and gives the film value. And actors always receive their fee up front. So if you assume the producer must be making the most money because they're in charge, that's usually not true, at least not at first. But here's where it changes. Producers don't typically think about money in terms of salary. They think about credits, they think about their track record, they think about their library of titles. In this industry, your body of work is leverage. Every film you produce expands your credibility. It proves you can get something financed, it proves you can get something delivered, it proves you can navigate distribution. That credibility makes the next project possible. At the same time, every project adds to your library. And a library isn't just a resume, it's ownership. If those films perform, they generate revenue. Maybe not dramatically at first, but consistently over time. And that's where the shift happens. The larger your library becomes, the more long-term leverage you create. Not just creatively, but financially. Especially at the independent level, you can't afford to think short-term. You can't chase the kind of upfront paycheck that a movie star makes. That's not how producing is structured. The producer's real upside usually isn't in the fee, it's in the back end, it's in the ownership. So you have to think differently. You have to think long term. You have to think like somebody building asset, not just collecting income. Now, as I said, every film a producer completes becomes part of their library. And if that film reaches profitability, meaning it earns back its budget and begins generating actual profit, the producer typically participates in that profit through ownership. That's what back end means. It means once a film moves beyond recouping costs, the producer shares in what it continues to earn. And now films can continue earning for years through streaming, through international sales, through licensing, through television, through new distribution windows that didn't even exist when the film was made. So the revenue isn't one payment, it's ongoing. Now, multiply that across multiple projects. You might own 30% of one film, 15% of another, 20% of another, 10% of another. That means if those films make money, you participate at those levels. Now, individually, none of those may feel dramatic, but if several of those films perform, even modestly, they continue generating revenue at the same time. And that's where compounding begins, not from one massive hit, but from multiple films quietly working in the background. And over years, that stacking effect grows. That's how producers can out-earn everyone long term, not because they made the most on one project, but because they built ownership across many. It is a slower strategy, but it's a durable one. Now, let's be very clear, this is not guaranteed. If the film doesn't perform, the producer doesn't do well. There's real downside here. Short-term, producers can struggle. They're often the ones deferring their pay until the film sells. They're the ones who have a year, usually more, invested before the cameras even roll. And when production starts, they can still be making a fraction of what the actors are earning up front. You know, that's the structure. This isn't a shortcut to wealth, it's a calculated risk. You're trading immediate income for long-term ownership. And if the film doesn't work, that trade doesn't pay off. But if it does, it's amazing. On a recent project, my business partner and indie producer Mark Klebanoff is producing. Both of the lead actors are earning strong six-figure salaries for what's essentially a month of work. And he has had more than a year invested in that project before it even reached production. And up front, he's making a fraction of what they're making. But that's not unusual. That's producing. But here's the difference. The film isn't just being made from a creative perspective. It's also being structured strategically for distribution, which means he's choosing to take less upfront because the real upside is in the back end, the ownership, the long-term participation in profits. If the film performs the way it's designed to, it will generate revenue for years. And over time, that participation can exceed the original producing fee many times over. So that's a trade-off. You give up immediate income in exchange for long-term ownership. And that only works if the film is structured correctly from the beginning. When you look at major producers, whether it's someone like Jerry Bruckheimer or Joel Silver, they're wealth isn't built primarily from large upfront fees. It's built from profit participation, from back end, from ownership. They were involved from development all the way through delivery. They assumed the risk, they structured the financing, they negotiated the participation. And because of that, they retain meaningful ownership in film that continue generating revenue long after their theatrical release. That's how wealth compounds in this industry, not from one big paycheck, but from long-term participation in multiple successful projects. Films don't expire quickly anymore. They have a long shelf life. There are films Mark produced more than 15 years ago that still generate residual revenue today. They're not making anyone instantly wealthy, but they continue to send checks quarterly and consistently, which is amazing. That's what ownership does. When a film is structured properly and back-end participation is in place, it can continue earning long after its initial release. And if one of those films performs in a meaningful way, the upside can be significant. But even without a breakout hit, stacking ownership across multiple projects creates long-term leverage. It's not dramatic, it's not overnight, but over time. So when I say producers can out-earn everybody in the film industry, I'm not talking about upfront salary. I'm talking about long-term ownership. Actors and directors can absolutely make extraordinary money. There's no question about that. But producers who approach their projects strategically are building assets. And building assets requires a different mindset. It requires patience. It requires risk tolerance, thoughtful packaging. It requires an understanding of distribution. And it requires thinking about back-end participation before production ever begins. Because if you're producing without understanding how the film will be sold, without considering profitability, without structuring ownership intentionally, you're not building an asset, you're taking a gamble. When a project is structured correctly from the beginning, you're building something that continue working for you long after the shoot wraps. And that's the difference. Now, if you want help applying this, because knowing producers build wealth through ownership is one thing, but structuring your film for it is another. We created the Creative Producers Filmmaking Roadmap. It shows you how to think like an owner from day one, how to package strategically, align budget with distribution, and negotiate back end intentionally. Because the back end isn't something you just hope for at the end, it's something you designed at the beginning. So if you want access, it's linked below. And if you're interested in learning about our full mentorship program, email us to see if it's a right fit for you. Understanding the concept of building long-term revenue is powerful. Structuring for it is what builds longevity. If you're considering becoming a producer, you need to understand the game you're playing. If your goal is the biggest paycheck today, producing probably isn't the fastest path. But if your goal is long-term ownership, if your goal is stacking assets over time, then it can be one of the most powerful roles in the industry. Producing isn't glamorous. It's risk, it's pressure, and the responsibility for everything lands on the producer. But when a project is structured properly from the beginning, producing is one of the few roles where ownership actually lives. And ownership is where wealth compounds. Not overnight, but over time. If you want more breakdowns like this, the parts of the industry people don't always explain clearly, make sure you're subscribed. On this channel, we go into the mechanics behind funding, distribution, profitability, and what it actually takes to build a sustainable career in film. Because making one film is one thing, building a career that lasts is another. And understanding how money really works in this industry is part of that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.